The security cameras at Apex Innovations captured more than just another delivery man that rainy Tuesday morning. They recorded the first chapter of an incredible journey that would transform lives forever. If you've ever doubted that fate works in mysterious ways, this story will restore your faith. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more extraordinary tales of courage and redemption. Jackson Walsh tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his battered pickup truck as he navigated the pre-dawn traffic. The dashboard clock read 5:15 a.m., another early start to what would be a 16-hour workday. Scattered across the passenger seat were energy drink cans and a dog-eared physics textbook he hadn't opened in weeks. A framed photo of two smiling children, Lily and Noah, was carefully secured to the dashboard, his reason for everything. "Just keep going," Jackson whispered to himself, repeating the phrase that had sustained him through 3 years of exhaustion and sacrifice. Just keep going. At 36, Jackson looked older than his years. Deep lines marked his once youthful face, and premature gray streaked his dark hair. 5 years earlier, he had been Dr. Jackson Walsh, a promising research physicist specializing in medical applications of quantum technology. Now, he delivered packages by day and drove for a food delivery service by night, all while raising 2 children alone. Jackson pulled into the employee lot of Fast Track Delivery, nodding to familiar faces as he collected his scanner and first batch of packages. His supervisor, Donna, waved him over with an urgent expression. "Walsh. I need you to take the Apex Innovations route today. Special deliveries that need to be there before their board meeting." Jackson checked his watch with a frown. Apex was across town, which would throw off his entire schedule. "Can someone else take it?" "You're the only one I trust with their packages," Donna replied. "Besides, they tip well. Might help with Lily's medical bills, right?" At the mention of his daughter, Jackson nodded reluctantly. 10-year-old Lily's rare neurological condition had been stable recently, but the treatments were financially crippling. Apex Innovations headquarters rose like a gleaming monolith against the morning sky, its curved glass exterior reflecting clouds and city lights. The contrast between this temple of wealth and Jackson's struggling reality wasn't lost on him as he parked his truck in the delivery zone. At the security desk, Jackson presented his credentials and waited as the guard inspected the packages, specialized equipment requiring careful handling. "5th floor, Research Division," the guard instructed. "Someone will meet you at the elevator." The elevator doors opened to reveal a young lab assistant named Daniel, who helped Jackson unload the packages onto a cart. "Thanks for bringing these so early. The research team has been waiting for weeks for these components." As Jackson finished the delivery paperwork, a door opened at the end of the corridor. A woman emerged, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, her auburn hair styled in a precise bob. Even without having seen her photos in business magazines, Jackson would have recognized Rebecca Morgan, CEO of Apex Innovations and one of the most powerful women in the tech industry. Their eyes met briefly across the hallway. Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps, or simple curiosity. Jackson quickly looked away, focusing on completing the delivery and getting back to his route. Neither could have guessed that their lives were already connected through an invisible thread of circumstance and tragedy, a connection that would soon upend everything they thought they knew. 2 weeks later, Jackson was reviewing his delivery schedule when he noticed Apex Innovations listed for daily deliveries for the next month. "They specifically requested you," Donna explained. "Apparently, you made quite an impression." Jackson couldn't imagine how, but the consistent route would mean more predictable hours, a rare blessing in his chaotic life. On his first day of the new arrangement, Daniel was waiting to escort him through the labyrinth of Apex's research wing. As they passed laboratories filled with equipment Jackson once knew intimately, a familiar longing stirred in him. "You seem to know your way around this equipment," Daniel observed as he noticed Jackson examining a quantum resonance chamber. "I used to work in a similar field," Jackson admitted, immediately regretting the disclosure. "Really? What area?" "Medical physics. A lifetime ago." Before Daniel could inquire further, Rebecca Morgan emerged from a nearby lab, engaged in discussion with a colleague. She paused upon seeing Jackson, that same flicker of recognition crossing her features. "Mr. Walsh," she said, surprising him by using his name. "Thank you for accommodating our delivery schedule." Jackson nodded awkwardly. "Just doing my job, Ms. Morgan." "Rebecca, please." Her penetrating gaze seemed to assess him with unusual intensity. "Daniel tells me you have a background in physics?" Jackson felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd spent years burying his past, creating a new identity as just another delivery guy. The last thing he needed was someone digging into his history. "Just some college courses," he lied. "Nothing serious." Rebecca's expression suggested she didn't believe him, but she didn't press further. "Well, we appreciate your careful handling of our materials. Some of them are quite delicate." As Jackson left the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca Morgan had somehow seen through his carefully constructed facade. What he didn't know was that she had already begun researching his background, intrigued by the delivery man with a physicist's understanding of their equipment. That evening, Jackson arrived home well after 8, exhausted but grateful for the slightly shorter workday. His apartment was small but clean, located in a modest complex that mainly housed working families. Mrs. Gonzalez from next door rose from the couch where she'd been watching television with the children. "They've both finished homework," she reported quietly. "Lily took all her medication, and Noah built something with his science kit that he's very excited to show you." Jackson thanked her and paid for the day's childcare, another expense that stretched his meager budget. After Mrs. Gonzalez left, he moved quietly to check on his children. 8-year-old Noah had fallen asleep surrounded by components of his latest science project. Lily was still awake, writing in the journal where she diligently tracked her symptoms and medications. "Hey, Butterfly," Jackson said softly, sitting at the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than yesterday," Lily replied with the matter-of-fact assessment of a child who had spent too much time evaluating her own health. "The new medication doesn't make me as dizzy." Jackson brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his heart swelling with love and aching with guilt simultaneously. She deserved so much more than a perpetually absent father and a life dictated by medical needs. After Lily fell asleep, Jackson retreated to his bedroom and opened a hidden panel in his closet wall. Behind it was a small, sophisticated laboratory setup, equipment salvaged from dumpsters outside research facilities, components purchased piece by piece over years, all arranged with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. 5 years earlier, as a researcher at Westlake University, Jackson had been developing breakthrough technology that used quantum principles to target and repair damaged neural pathways. When his wife Catherine was diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor, his research took on desperate urgency. In the final months of her life, Jackson had made a potentially revolutionary discovery, a targeted quantum therapy that could repair neural damage without affecting healthy tissue. But his methods had crossed ethical boundaries. He had used university resources without authorization, conducted unsanctioned trials, and bypassed required safety protocols in his race against Catherine's rapidly advancing disease. When Catherine died despite his efforts, the university launched an investigation into his research practices. Facing potential criminal charges and the risk of losing custody of his children, Jackson made a devastating choice. He destroyed key evidence, resigned his position, and walked away from science forever. Or so everyone believed. In reality, Jackson had continued his research in secret, converting part of his bedroom into a miniature lab where he worked during the precious few hours between his children's bedtime and his early morning shift. When Lily began showing neurological symptoms similar to the conditions his technology was designed to address, his covert research became a desperate race against time. What Jackson didn't know was that across town, Rebecca Morgan was reviewing old scientific journals featuring articles by Dr. Jackson Walsh, whose groundbreaking work in quantum medical applications had mysteriously ceased 5 years earlier, right around the time a delivery man with the same name appeared in employment records of various courier companies. The connection had been made. It was only a matter of time before their worlds collided in ways neither could anticipate. For the next 2 weeks, Jackson continued his daily deliveries to Apex, increasingly aware of Rebecca Morgan's attention. She often appeared when he arrived, asking questions that suggested a deeper knowledge of what he was delivering than a typical CEO should possess. On a Thursday morning, as Jackson was carefully handling sensitive quantum components, Rebecca appeared beside him in the receiving area. "Those need to be kept at exactly -70°C, she noted, watching him work. "The quantum state is extremely fragile." Jackson carefully placed the containers in the designated storage unit using proper handling techniques without thinking. Only afterward did he realize his mistake. A delivery person wouldn't know the precise protocols for quantum components. Rebecca's slight smile confirmed his fear. "Most delivery personnel would simply hand those containers to our lab staff, Mr. Walsh." Jackson straightened, heart pounding. "I like to be thorough." "Indeed." She held his gaze steadily. "Would you join me in my office briefly? There's something I'd like to discuss." Every instinct told Jackson to decline, but curiosity, and fear of what she might already know, compelled him to follow her to the executive floor. Rebecca's office was spacious yet functional, with few personal touches beyond a photograph of a young woman on her desk. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city where Jackson's children were currently at school, unaware of the precarious situation their father now faced. "Please, sit," Rebecca gestured to a chair. "Coffee?" Jackson declined, perching tensely on the edge of the seat. "I should get back to my route." "This won't take long," she assured him, taking her own seat. Without preamble, she placed a scientific journal on the desk between them, open to a page featuring a younger Jackson's photograph above an article about quantum applications in neurological repair. "Dr. Jackson Walsh," Rebecca said, watching his reaction carefully. Considered one of the most promising researchers in quantum medical technology until his abrupt resignation 5 years ago following allegations of ethical misconduct. No criminal charges were filed, but his scientific career was effectively terminated. Jackson felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you want?" "Initially, I was curious why a former quantum physicist with your credentials would be delivering packages to my company." She leaned forward slightly. "But then I began to wonder what you've been doing since you disappeared from academia." Jackson stood, ready to walk out. "I've been raising my children and making an honest living. That's all." "Is it?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "My security team noticed something interesting when they reviewed footage of you entering our building. Your delivery bag sometimes weighs more when you leave than when you arrive." The accusation hung between them. Jackson had indeed been taking small amounts of discarded materials from Apex Labs, nothing valuable or proprietary, just components he couldn't afford and basic supplies that would otherwise be thrown away. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice hollow even to his own ears. Rebecca sighed, seeming almost disappointed by his denial. "Dr. Walsh, I'm not interested in having you arrested. Quite the opposite." She stood and walked to the window, her back to him. "Your research on quantum neural repair was revolutionary. The approach you were developing could have helped countless patients with neurological conditions. Including, perhaps, your daughter." Jackson froze. "How do you know about Lily?" "I make it my business to know things, Dr. Walsh. Especially about people who interest me." She turned to face him again. "Lily's medical records show a condition that your research might have been able to address. An unfortunate coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Jackson felt cornered, exposed in a way he hadn't been in years. The careful wall between his past and present was crumbling before his eyes. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Rebecca's expression softened slightly, the first real humanity he'd seen in her. "I want to offer you a job, Dr. Walsh. Not as a delivery man, but as a researcher. Here, at Apex Innovations." Of all the scenarios Jackson had imagined, this was perhaps the last. Why would you do that? My reputation is precisely why I want you, Rebecca finished. You were willing to push boundaries to save lives. That's the kind of thinking we need. She returned to her desk and opened a folder. I've reviewed your published research. There are gaps, things you clearly withheld when you left Westlake. But what's there is remarkable. With Apex's resources, you could complete what you started. The offer was tantalizing: access to state-of-the-art laboratories, legitimate continuation of his work, a salary that would ease his financial struggles and allow him to spend more time with his children. But years of protective secrecy had built walls that couldn't be dismantled in a single conversation. I appreciate the offer, but I can't. Can't? Or won't? She studied him intently. What are you hiding, Dr. Walsh? What is it that you're still working on in that makeshift laboratory in your apartment? Her direct reference to his secret work sent a chill through Jackson. If she knew about that, what else did she know? I'm not hiding anything, he insisted, rising to leave. I'm just a delivery man trying to support his family. Whatever I was before, that person doesn't exist anymore. Rebecca didn't try to stop him as he moved toward the door, but her voice followed him. Lily's condition is progressing, isn't it? The current treatments are becoming less effective. You're running out of time. Jackson paused with his hand on the doorknob, his back to her so she wouldn't see the fear and anguish on his face. My offer remains open, Rebecca continued softly. Think about it, not just for your sake, but for Lily's. As Jackson left Apex that day, his mind was in turmoil. Rebecca Morgan had shattered the careful boundaries between his past and present, confronting him with impossible choices. What he didn't yet understand was why the CEO of a billion-dollar technology company would take such personal interest in a disgraced scientist-turned-delivery man. The answer would prove more surprising, and more life-changing, than anything he could have imagined. For 3 days, Jackson avoided the Apex deliveries, swapping routes with colleagues and making excuses to Donna. But Rebecca's words haunted him, particularly as he watched Lily struggle with increasingly severe symptoms. On the 4th morning, as he prepared Lily's medications, his daughter looked up at him with eyes too wise for her 10 years. Dad, am I getting worse? The question pierced his heart. Why would you think that? Lily shrugged with the resigned pragmatism of a child who had spent too much time in hospitals. More pills. More tired. Noah said you were crying last night. Jackson sat beside her on the bed, pulling her into a gentle hug. I'm working on something that might help you feel better. It's just complicated. Because of Mom's research? Lily asked. Jackson stiffened in surprise. What do you mean? I found Mom's old papers in your room. The ones about fixing broken brain pathways. She was trying to help people like me, wasn't she? Jackson hadn't realized Lily had connected these dots. Catherine had indeed been his research partner before her diagnosis. It was one of the reasons her death had been so devastating, losing both his wife and his scientific collaborator in one blow. Yes, sweetheart. Mom was brilliant at finding ways to help people. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Then you should finish what she started. Mom would want that. That afternoon, Jackson called Apex Innovations and asked to speak with Rebecca Morgan. The next morning found Jackson in Rebecca's office again, having arrived in his own truck rather than the delivery van. He'd taken a rare day off, arranging for Mrs. Gonzalez to take the children to school. I have conditions, Jackson said, foregoing pleasantries. He'd spent the night reviewing Rebecca's offer and preparing his terms. Rebecca nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his directness. I expected as much. Let's hear them. I need flexible hours to be there for my children. Lily's condition requires regular medical appointments, and Noah. He paused. They've already lost their mother. I won't be an absent father. Reasonable, Rebecca agreed. We can accommodate your schedule. I want to continue my previous research line, with full access to Apex's resources but maintaining control over the direction of the work. Rebecca's expression remained neutral. Also acceptable, with the understanding that any breakthroughs will be subject to Apex's standard patent processes. Jackson took a deep breath before stating his final condition. And I need to understand why you're doing this. Why me, specifically? For the first time, Rebecca seemed slightly uncomfortable. She rose and walked to the window before turning back to face him. That's more complicated. She returned to her seat. Let's just say I have a personal interest in your specific area of research. Jackson studied her face, noting the faint lines of strain around her eyes. The neural repair technology? Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment before reaching for the photograph on her desk, the one he'd noticed during his previous visit. She turned it to face him. This is my daughter, Hannah. She's 21 now, but this was taken when she was 18, just before she was injured in a car accident that left her with severe neural damage. The doctors say her condition is permanent. Understanding dawned on Jackson. Similar to what my technology was designed to address. Similar enough that when I read your research papers, I felt hope for the first time in years. Rebecca's professional veneer cracked slightly, revealing the worried mother beneath. Hannah has plateaued in her recovery. The current therapies have taken her as far as they can. Jackson knew that reality all too well, the cruel limitations of existing treatments that could manage symptoms but never truly repair the underlying damage. So this isn't just a business decision, he said. Rebecca shook her head. No. It's much more personal. I've had our research team working on similar approaches to yours, but they've hit roadblocks at exactly the points where your published work ended. Whatever breakthroughs you were about to make before you left Westlake, those are the missing pieces. The revelation shifted Jackson's perception of the formidable CEO. Behind the power suits and corporate authority was a mother fighting for her child, just as he was. I haven't solved it yet, Jackson admitted. I've been working with limited resources, making painfully slow progress. But you've continued the research, Rebecca pressed. Despite everything, you never really stopped, did you? Jackson hesitated before answering truthfully. I couldn't. Not when Lily started showing symptoms. It was like the universe was playing some cosmic joke, giving my daughter the exact condition I'd been researching. Then help me help both our daughters, Rebecca said, her usual commanding tone replaced by something more vulnerable. With Apex's resources and your insights, we might accomplish together what neither of us could do alone. It was this unexpected common ground, this shared parental desperation, that finally convinced Jackson. Whatever else Rebecca Morgan might be, she understood the driving force behind his work in a way few others could. I'll need to see Hannah's medical records, he said, already thinking of the implications for his research. And I'll need to bring my own notes and equipment. Some of what I've been doing, it isn't exactly FDA-approved experimentation. Rebecca's smile was grim but determined. Dr. Walsh, you're talking to someone who once flew her daughter to an experimental clinic in Switzerland based on little more than promising preliminary data. I'm well past concerning myself with bureaucratic approvals when it comes to Hannah's life. By the end of that meeting, Jackson Walsh was officially an employee of Apex Innovations, granted the title of Special Research Fellow with his own laboratory and a salary that made him dizzy to contemplate. His first act would be to bring in his homebrew research and integrate it with Apex's existing programs. What neither Jackson nor Rebecca fully grasped in that moment was how their alliance would soon expose secrets far beyond those they'd already shared, secrets that would shake Apex Innovations to its foundations and force them both to confront painful truths about the past. Jackson's transition from delivery man to researcher came with a whirlwind of changes. He gave notice at Fast Track, arranged for more consistent childcare with Mrs. Gonzalez, and explained to his children that he would be working in a laboratory again, news that delighted Noah and brought a spark of hope to Lily's eyes. On his first official day at Apex, a laboratory had been prepared according to his specifications. The equipment was cutting edge, far beyond what he'd had access to even in his university days. Dr. Walsh, greeted Dr. Maya Patel, Apex's research director. It's an honor to meet you. Your papers on quantum neural interfaces influenced my own doctoral work. Jackson felt a strange blend of pride and discomfort at being recognized for work that seemed to belong to another lifetime. Thank you, Dr. Patel. I'm looking forward to picking up where I left off, with considerably better equipment. Ms. Morgan has given your project top priority, Maya explained. Whatever resources you need, just ask. As Jackson settled into his new laboratory, carefully unpacking the components he'd brought from home, Rebecca visited briefly. She maintained a professional demeanor but gave Jackson a meaningful look that conveyed their shared stakes in the project's success. She provided him with Hannah's complete medical history, a thick file documenting the young woman's 3-year struggle with her condition. That evening, after the lab had emptied, Jackson remained, comparing Hannah's records with Lily's. The underlying mechanisms were different, but the neural pathways affected were similar enough that his technology could potentially address both conditions. He was so absorbed in his analysis that he didn't notice the janitor who entered to empty the trash bins, an older man named Earl who'd worked at Apex for over a decade. Earl paused, studying Jackson with an intensity that would have alarmed him had he noticed. The next day, Jackson began integrating his experimental technology with Apex's existing research. The work was exhilarating after years of making do with inadequate equipment and stolen moments between exhausting jobs. By the end of the week, he'd made more progress than in the previous 6 months combined. Rebecca requested daily updates, often visiting the lab after hours. During these visits, the corporate formality between them softened slightly, giving way to the shared concern of parents fighting for their children's futures. Lily's neurologist was surprised by her latest test results, Jackson mentioned during one such evening session. The experimental treatment I've been giving her seems to be slowing the progression. Rebecca nodded, hope flickering across her face. Could the same approach work for Hannah? Potentially, though her case is different. We'd need to modify the parameters significantly. Jackson hesitated before adding, I'd like to meet her, if that's possible. Seeing the patient can sometimes provide insights that scans and data don't capture. A shadow passed over Rebecca's features. Hannah is private about her condition. She doesn't like to be seen as a patient or a research subject. I understand that feeling, Jackson said, thinking of Lily's frustration with being defined by her illness. But it might help us tailor the treatment more effectively. Rebecca considered this before reluctantly agreeing. I'll speak with her. As they continued discussing treatment possibilities, neither noticed the small red light of an active security camera in the corner of the lab, a camera that should have been turned off after business hours. The following Monday, Dr. Thomas Garrett, Apex's head of medical ethics, requested a meeting with Jackson. Thomas was renowned in scientific circles for his principled approach to emerging technologies. Your preliminary results are impressive, Dr. Walsh, Thomas said after reviewing Jackson's data. But I have concerns about the accelerated timeline Ms. Morgan is pushing for. Jackson understood immediately. You're worried about moving to human trials too quickly. Thomas nodded. Exactly. While I sympathize with the personal stakes involved, rushing experimental treatments can have devastating consequences. I'm well aware of the risks, Jackson assured him. My daughter. Yes, I know about Lily, Thomas interrupted gently. And about Hannah Morgan as well. That's precisely what concerns me. When researchers have such personal involvement, objectivity can be compromised. It was a fair point, one that Jackson had struggled with himself. What would you suggest? Additional preclinical testing, for starters. And an independent review before we consider human applications. Thomas's expression was sympathetic but firm. I'm not trying to obstruct your work, Dr. Walsh. I want to ensure it succeeds safely. Jackson appreciated the candor, even if it meant potential delays. I'll incorporate your suggestions into the next phase. As Thomas left, Jackson noticed Rebecca watching from the hallway. She entered the lab after Thomas had gone, closing the door behind her. "What did Garrett want?" she asked without preamble. Jackson explained Thomas's concerns about their timeline. "He's right about the need for thorough testing, Rebecca. We can't risk. We don't have time for bureaucratic caution," she cut in, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Hannah's latest scans show further deterioration. Another 6 months of thorough testing could mean permanent damage. And rushing an untested treatment could cause worse harm," Jackson countered gently. "I understand the urgency, believe me, I do. But we need to be certain." Rebecca's professional composure slipped further. "Do you know why I really sought you out, Jackson? Not just because of your research, but because you were willing to take risks when Catherine was dying. You didn't wait for committee approvals or peer reviews. You acted. The accusation struck a painful chord. And I paid a heavy price for that decision. My career was destroyed, my reputation ruined. I nearly lost custody of my children. But you don't regret it, do you?" Rebecca pressed. "If there had been even a chance to save Catherine, wouldn't any price have been worth paying?" Jackson couldn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. Yes, he would have done anything to save Catherine, but the aftermath had taught him harsh lessons about consequences. "I can't make the same mistakes again," he finally said. "Not with Lily's future at stake. And not with Hannah's life in the balance either." Rebecca's expression hardened momentarily before she regained control. "Fine. Follow Garrett's protocols if you must. But remember, every day we delay is a day our daughters suffer." After she left, Jackson remained in the lab late into the night, troubled by the interaction. Rebecca's words had awakened painful memories, the desperate final days of Catherine's illness, the ethical lines he'd crossed in pursuit of a cure that came too late. What Rebecca didn't know, what no one at Apex knew, was that Jackson's disgrace had been partially self-inflicted. When Westlake University began investigating his research practices, he had deliberately shouldered all blame, protecting others who had been involved. It was a secret he'd carried alone for 5 years. As Jackson finally prepared to leave, exhausted and preoccupied, he failed to notice Earl the janitor watching him from the hallway, a cell phone clutched in the older man's hand. If he had, he might have recognized the face of someone connected to his past, someone who had been waiting years for Dr. Jackson Walsh to emerge from hiding. The following weeks established a new rhythm for Jackson's life. His days were filled with research at Apex, his evenings dedicated to Lily and Noah. The improved salary allowed him to hire a part-time nurse for Lily's care needs and provided Noah with educational opportunities that had previously been unaffordable. On a crisp fall morning, Jackson arrived at the lab to find Rebecca waiting for him, accompanied by a young woman in a wheelchair. Despite her physical limitations, Hannah Morgan had her mother's commanding presence, with intelligent eyes that assessed Jackson critically. "Dr. Walsh," Rebecca said formally, "this is my daughter, Hannah. She's agreed to meet with you to discuss her potential participation in the treatment protocol." Jackson extended his hand, which Hannah took in a surprisingly firm grip. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Hannah. I've learned a lot from your medical records, but meeting you in person is much more valuable." "So I'm told," Hannah replied with a hint of dry humor. "Though I generally prefer not to be a medical curiosity." "I understand completely," Jackson assured her. "My daughter Lily feels the same way about her condition." Something in Hannah's expression softened at the mention of Lily. "Mom told me about her. She's much younger than I was when my accident happened. That must be difficult." "It is, but Lily is remarkably resilient." Jackson gestured toward his office. "Would you like to talk somewhere more private? I can explain where we are with the research." For the next hour, Jackson walked Hannah through his findings, explaining in layperson's terms the approach he was developing. Unlike many patients, Hannah asked sophisticated questions that revealed a substantial understanding of neuroscience. "I've had 3 years to study my own condition," she explained when Jackson commented on her knowledge. I was pre-med before the accident. I figured if I was going to live with this, I should at least understand exactly what was happening to me. That's exactly Lily's attitude, Jackson said with a smile. She keeps a journal tracking her symptoms and medication effects. The doctors are always impressed. I'd like to meet her sometime, Hannah said, surprising both Jackson and Rebecca. It might be good for her to talk with someone who understands what she's going through, even if our conditions aren't identical. The suggestion touched Jackson deeply. I think she'd like that very much. After Hannah had been escorted back to her apartment within the Apex complex, Rebecca lingered in Jackson's office. She likes you, she observed. Hannah doesn't trust doctors easily, not after 3 years of being treated like a fascinating case study rather than a person. She's impressive, Jackson replied honestly. Her understanding of her condition is remarkable. Hannah was going to be a neurosurgeon, Rebecca explained with a sad smile. She had to withdraw from medical school after the accident, but she continues to study independently. She still might, Jackson said. If our treatment works. When it works, Rebecca corrected firmly. When it works, Jackson agreed, there's no reason she couldn't resume her studies. Rebecca nodded, her usual composure briefly replaced by raw hope. That's what keeps me going. The possibility of Hannah reclaiming the future that was stolen from her. The personal moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Dr. Maya Patel entered, her expression serious. Ms. Morgan, Dr. Walsh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation you should both be aware of. Rebecca immediately straightened, corporate mask back in place. What is it, Maya? We've detected unusual access patterns in our research database. Someone has been reviewing Dr. Walsh's files during off hours, including restricted data from your joint sessions. Jackson felt a chill of apprehension. Could it be a technical glitch? Maya shook her head. No, this was definitely human access, using high-level credentials. Security is investigating. Thank you, Maya, Rebecca said dismissively. Please keep us informed. After Maya left, Jackson voiced his concern. Could someone be trying to steal the research? Industrial espionage? Rebecca looked troubled. It's possible. Apex has competitors who would pay handsomely for breakthrough neural technology. But the access pattern suggests something more targeted, specifically interest in your work and our discussions. Which means someone knows about the personal connection to Hannah and Lily, Jackson concluded. That's not public information. No, it isn't. Rebecca's voice hardened. I'll have security increase monitoring. Be cautious about what you discuss and with whom. That evening, as Jackson walked to his truck in the nearly empty parking garage, he had the distinct feeling of being watched. Glancing around, he caught a glimpse of movement near a concrete pillar. Hello, he called. Is someone there? After a moment's silence, Earl the janitor emerged, carrying his cleaning supplies. Sorry if I startled you, Dr. Walsh, the older man said. Just finishing up my rounds. Jackson nodded, though something about Earl's presence seemed odd. No problem. Have a good night. As Jackson drove home, his rearview mirror revealed a sedan pulling out of the garage behind him. The car maintained a consistent distance all the way to his apartment complex, only driving past when Jackson turned into the parking lot. It could have been coincidence, but combined with the database breach, it left him deeply unsettled. Inside his apartment, he spent time helping Noah with homework and checking Lily's evening medication. Only when both children were asleep did he allow himself to revisit the troubling events of the day. Opening his laptop, Jackson accessed his personal research notes, data he hadn't yet uploaded to Apex's system. As he reviewed his progress, a notification appeared in his email, a message from an unfamiliar address with no subject line. Against his better judgment, Jackson opened it. The message contained only 2 sentences, "Your research didn't die with Catherine. They've known all along." Jackson stared at the screen, blood rushing in his ears. The reference to Catherine could only come from someone who knew their shared past. And, they've known all along, what did that mean? Before he could consider the implications, his phone rang. Rebecca's number flashed on the screen. "There's been a development," she said without preamble when he answered. "Security found something on the cameras. I need you to come back to Apex. Now." "It's almost midnight," Jackson protested, glancing toward the children's bedroom. "I can't leave Lily and Noah alone." There was a pause before Rebecca replied, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Bring them with you if you must, but this can't wait until morning. It's about Catherine." The name sent a shock through Jackson. "What about Catherine? How do you—" "Not over the phone," Rebecca cut him off. "Just come to Apex as soon as you can. Use the executive entrance." With shaking hands, Jackson woke the children, apologizing for the late-night disruption as he helped them into warm clothes. Noah, curious despite the hour, asked the question Jackson had been dreading. "Is this about your secret research, Dad?" the 8-year-old asked as they rode the elevator down to the parking garage. Jackson nearly stumbled in surprise. "What secret research?" Noah gave him the exasperated look children reserve for adults who underestimate them. "The stuff you work on at home when you think we're asleep. The medicine for Lily." "How long have you known about that?" Noah shrugged. "Forever. Lily and I both know. We're not babies, Dad." The simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence, nearly undid Jackson. All this time, he'd thought he was protecting his children from worries beyond their years, when in fact they had been quietly bearing the knowledge alongside him. "Yes," he admitted as they reached the truck. "It's about the research. There's something important happening at the lab." As they drove toward Apex in the midnight darkness, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Whatever Rebecca had discovered about Catherine, whatever connection existed between his past research and his current work at Apex, it was about to come to light. What Jackson couldn't possibly know was that the revelations awaiting him would not only change his understanding of the past 5 years but would expose a conspiracy reaching back to Catherine's final days, a conspiracy in which Rebecca Morgan had played a far more significant role than she had ever admitted. The Apex building was eerily quiet as Jackson guided his half-asleep children through the executive entrance. A security guard nodded in recognition, having been instructed to expect them. The private elevator took them directly to the executive floor, where Rebecca's office was located. "Wait here for a moment," Jackson told Lily and Noah, settling them on a sofa in the reception area. "I need to speak with Ms. Morgan alone first." Lily, drowsy from her evening medications, curled up against her brother's shoulder. Noah, however, was wide awake, taking in every detail of the executive floor. "Is this where rich people work?" he whispered. Despite his anxiety, Jackson smiled at the question. "This is where people who run big companies work. Try to rest, okay? I won't be long." Rebecca was standing at her office window when Jackson entered, her back to the door as she gazed out at the city lights. She turned at the sound of his arrival, her face showing signs of strain that her carefully applied makeup couldn't conceal. "You brought the children," she observed. "I didn't have a choice." "What's this about, Rebecca? How do you know about Catherine?" Instead of answering directly, Rebecca moved to her desk and pressed a key on her computer. The large wall screen illuminated, showing security footage of Earl the janitor in Jackson's laboratory, carefully photographing documents with his phone. "This is from 3 days ago," Rebecca explained. When security identified the unusual database access, they reviewed camera footage and found this. "Earl Williams has been systematically documenting your research since your first day at Apex." Jackson watched the footage with mounting confusion. "I don't understand. He's a janitor, what interest would he have in complex neural technology?" "Earl Williams is not just a janitor," Rebecca said grimly. His real name is Dr. Edward Harris. The name hit Jackson like a physical blow. That's impossible. Edward Harris was Catherine's research mentor. He died in a hiking accident 5 years ago, shortly after Catherine's funeral. Rebecca shook her head slowly. No, Jackson. He didn't die. He disappeared, deliberately, after discovering what had happened to his former student. What are you talking about? Jackson demanded, a cold dread spreading through him. Catherine died of an aggressive brain tumor. It was diagnosed too late for effective treatment. Is that what you truly believe? Rebecca asked quietly. Or is that the explanation you've accepted because the alternative was too painful to consider? Jackson felt suddenly unsteady, bracing himself against Rebecca's desk. Stop speaking in riddles. If you know something about Catherine's death, tell me plainly. Rebecca's expression softened with something like sympathy. Catherine's tumor wasn't natural, Jackson. It was induced, a side effect of experimental technology she was exposed to without her knowledge. That's absurd, Jackson protested, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. Catherine wasn't part of any experimental program. She would have told me. Not if she didn't know, Rebecca countered. Not if the exposure was happening under the guise of standard research protocols. The implication was so monstrous that Jackson could barely process it. You're suggesting someone deliberately caused Catherine's tumor? Who would do such a thing? Rebecca took a deep breath before continuing. 5 years ago, Westlake University's research division was pursuing several breakthrough neural technologies. One of them, the one you and Catherine were working on, showed particular promise for neural repair. Another team was investigating similar mechanisms for military applications. I know all this, Jackson said impatiently. Catherine and I occasionally collaborated with other research groups. Standard cross-disciplinary work. What wasn't standard was the interest from private industry, Rebecca continued. Specifically, from Neurosynth Technologies, which had invested heavily in acquiring promising neural interface patents for defense contracts. The name triggered a distant memory. Neurosynth had been one of several companies that had approached Westlake about licensing the technology Jackson and Catherine were developing. The university had declined all offers. What does this have to do with Catherine? Jackson asked, though the sickening answer was already forming. Neurosynth couldn't acquire the research legitimately, so they placed someone inside Westlake to acquire it by other means, Rebecca explained. This person exposed Catherine to experimental neural interfaces, ostensibly to test functionality but actually to gather data on neural responses. That's murder, Jackson whispered, horror washing over him. Yes, Rebecca agreed grimly. It was. And when the exposure triggered unexpected tumor growth, they simply watched and gathered data as Catherine's condition deteriorated. Jackson felt physically ill, memories of Catherine's rapid decline flashing through his mind. The doctor's confusion about the unusual presentation of her tumor, the way it had resisted standard treatments, her body's inexplicable failure to respond to therapies that should have at least slowed the progression. How do you know all this? He demanded, anger beginning to replace shock. And why are you only telling me now? Rebecca's gaze didn't waver. Because Edward Harris discovered the truth in the weeks following Catherine's death. He was reviewing her research logs, trying to understand her final projects, when he found irregularities in the neural scan data. As a senior neurologist, he recognized the markers of certain experimental technologies. If that's true, why didn't he come to me? Jackson asked, his voice raw with emotion. He tried to, Rebecca said quietly. But by then, you were already under investigation for your own research improprieties. Edward feared that if he brought these accusations forward without irrefutable evidence, Neurosynth's influence would ensure they were dismissed as the desperate theories of a grieving colleague. The pieces were beginning to fit together in Jackson's mind, forming a picture too horrible to contemplate yet impossible to dismiss. So Edward faked his death to pursue the investigation without alerting Neurosynth, Jackson concluded. But what does any of this have to do with Apex? With you? Rebecca hesitated, and for a moment, Jackson thought he saw genuine regret in her eyes. Because 5 years ago, before I founded Apex Innovations, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Neurosynth Technologies. The revelation struck Jackson with physical force, driving him back a step. You were part of this? No, Rebecca said firmly. I had no knowledge of the unethical testing. When I discovered what had been done, what my research director had authorized without my knowledge, I gathered evidence and prepared to bring it to the authorities. But you didn't, Jackson accused. I was about to when Hannah had her accident, Rebecca continued, her composure finally cracking. Suddenly, I had a daughter with neural damage that your research might have helped repair. The same research that Neurosynth had been so desperate to acquire. Jackson could barely process the tangled web of connections. So instead of exposing Neurosynth, you left and founded Apex, bringing the stolen research with you. Not stolen, Rebecca corrected. Rescued. I took what Neurosynth had acquired illegally and brought it somewhere it could be developed legitimately, for Hannah and for others with similar conditions. And never thought to tell me that my wife was murdered for that research? Jackson's voice rose in anger. That I've spent 5 years believing her death was natural while the people responsible went unpunished? I didn't know about your connection until recently, Rebecca insisted. When Edward recognized you delivering packages to Apex, he began investigating why you were here. That's when he contacted me, revealed his identity, and shared what he had discovered. Jackson struggled to contain his emotions, aware that his children were just outside the door. Where is he now? Where is Edward? Security is bringing him up, Rebecca said, glancing at her watch. He should be here any moment. He has evidence, Jackson, documentation that could bring Neurosynth to justice after all these years. As if on cue, the office door opened to admit a security officer escorting Earl the janitor, Edward Harris, Catherine's mentor, the man Jackson had believed dead for 5 years. The older man looked much as Jackson remembered, though grayer and more weathered, with the stooped posture he'd adopted in his janitorial disguise now straightened to reveal his true height. Jackson, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. For everything. Before Jackson could respond, a small voice from the doorway interrupted the tense reunion. Professor Harris? All heads turned to see Noah standing there, eyes wide with disbelief, Lily now awake beside him, her face reflecting the same shock. Edward's composure crumbled at the sight of the children. Noah. Lily. My God, how you've grown. The children rushed forward, confusion and joy mingling as they embraced the man who had been like family to them before Catherine's death. Jackson watched, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, anger at the deception, relief that Edward was alive, horror at the truth about Catherine's death, and beneath it all, a growing determination to see justice done. As the emotional reunion continued, Rebecca moved to Jackson's side. There's more you need to know, she said quietly. About Lily's condition. Jackson looked at her sharply. What about it? It may not be coincidental, Rebecca said carefully. Edward believes that Lily's neurological disorder may be connected to Catherine's exposure to the experimental technology during pregnancy. That the same mechanism that triggered Catherine's tumor may have caused neural development abnormalities in Lily. The implication was staggering, that not only had these people murdered his wife, but their actions had also condemned his daughter to a lifetime of illness. Jackson felt a rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Who, he demanded, his voice barely controlled. Who at Neurosynth was responsible? Who ordered this? Rebecca hesitated before answering. The research director who authorized the covert testing was Dr. Robert Morgan. My ex-husband. Hannah's father. The final revelation completed the circle of tragedy and connection that bound their families together. Rebecca hadn't just been a bystander to the events that destroyed Jackson's family, she had been married to the architect of that destruction. Does Hannah know? Jackson asked, his mind racing to process these revelations. Rebecca shook her head. Not yet. Robert abandoned us shortly after her accident, unable to face what his work had wrought when it touched his own daughter. The cruel irony is that the condition his unethical research helped cause in Lily also appeared in Hannah through an accident caused by faulty neural interface technology in her car, technology his company had rushed to market without adequate safety testing. Jackson looked at his children, still embracing their rediscovered mentor, then back to Rebecca. What happens now? That depends partly on you, she replied. Edward has gathered evidence over 5 years, enough to bring charges against Neurosynth and the individuals involved, including Robert. But pursuing justice will mean publicity, investigations, trials. It will affect all of us, you, me, the children, Apex. And the research? Jackson asked. The treatment that could help Lily and Hannah? That's the other consideration, Rebecca acknowledged. We're close to a breakthrough, Jackson. The latest results show promise beyond anything I'd hoped for. If we move forward with exposing Neurosynth now, it could delay or even derail that work. The choice presented was impossible, justice for Catherine versus timely treatment for Lily and Hannah. Jackson found himself torn between his duty to his dead wife and his obligation to his living daughter. There has to be another way, he insisted. Some path that allows us to pursue both justice and treatment. Edward approached, having momentarily disentangled himself from the children. There might be, he said. But it would require trust between us, trust one haven't earned after 5 years of deception. What do you propose? Jackson asked, not yet ready to offer forgiveness but willing to listen for Lily's sake. We complete the treatment protocol first, Edward suggested. Once it's developed and secured, once Lily and Hannah have begun receiving it, then we take the evidence public. It was a pragmatic solution, prioritizing the living while not abandoning the pursuit of justice for the dead. Jackson looked at Lily, her face alight with joy despite the fatigue of her condition. Everything he had done for the past 5 years had been for her and Noah, every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment of exhaustion. I need time to think, Jackson said finally. It's too much to process all at once. Of course, Rebecca agreed. Take whatever time you need. But remember, every day matters for both our daughters. As dawn broke over the city, Jackson sat in Apex's cafeteria with Lily and Noah, watching them devour breakfast after the emotional night. Edward had gone to secure his evidence, promising to return later. Rebecca had retreated to her office, giving Jackson space to consider what he had learned. For Jackson, it was the beginning of a new chapter in a story he had believed finished. Catherine's death, which he had finally come to accept as the cruel randomness of fate, was now revealed as something far worse, a deliberate act of callous indifference to human life in pursuit of profit. Yet alongside this painful truth came new hope, the possibility of justice, the continuation of Catherine's legacy through the research they had begun together, and most immediately, a treatment that might free Lily from the burden of her condition. As he watched his children, Jackson made his decision. He would continue the research, develop the treatment that could help Lily and Hannah, and then, with that secured, he would join Edward and Rebecca in exposing the truth about Neurosynth. Catherine would have her justice, and Lily would have her future. What Jackson couldn't know was that his decision would set in motion events that would test his resolve, challenge his ethics, and ultimately force him to confront what justice truly means when weighed against love, forgiveness, and the complex bonds of family. The delivery man's secret was fully revealed, and the CEO's reaction had indeed left everyone speechless, not with shock alone, but with the realization that sometimes the most unlikely connections can lead to both healing and justice when driven by a parent's love. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and unexpected connections. Share in the comments how Jackson and Lily's journey affected you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this remarkable story of a father's love and determination.